There, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and today is part 6 of the Tempest Remastered Set review. So the first 5 parts we looked at each color, going from white to blue to black to red and then finally green. Today we're going to look at all the multicolor and colorless cards that are in this Magic Online exclusive set. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first card is Ascetic Sliver, and this is a very good multicolor sliver. It's a 2/2 body, which is fantastic. Has synergy with all the other slivers. So what's nice about this guy is you can get your opponent down to maybe those last few points of damage, and if you're in a good spot, you can go ahead and start throwing slivers right at their face and do the last few points of damage. Now you do want to be careful with this. If you start chucking slivers too quick, could compromise your board state, and your opponent might be able to stabilize. Crystalline Sliver, and this one is just a bomb. If you're playing with any slivers, even on its own, it's still pretty good. It's a 2/2 with Shroud, but if you're playing with 2, 3 other slivers on the board and your opponent can't use spot removal against them, they can get out of control pretty quick, especially if you have something like Wing Sliver that's going to give them all evasion. It just gets out of control fast. So where Muscle Sliver is probably the engine for the sliver strategy, this is what protects your slivers and keeps them alive. It's an incredibly valuable card. Dracoplasm, and this has evasion and can be pretty big. The only thing I'd say about this guy, though, is if he gets destroyed, you're in probably a lot of trouble if you put all your eggs in this basket. I don't really like this card a lot, to be quite honest, whereas, yeah, it can get across a lot of damage. I love the fact that it has flying. It also has fire breathing on top of everything else. But let's face it, if you start sacrificing your creatures to pump this guy up and he gets hit with spot removal, that is going to be a feel bad, and you might not be able to recover from that. So I think this is a very tough card. It is the type of card that if it had haste, it would be much better, but in its current state, I'd honestly say just stay away from it. Hibernation Silver, and this is another great way to protect your slivers. So if you don't have Crystalline Silver out yet, or even if you do, what's kind of nice about this is you're just able to pay life, return slivers to your hand if you need to protect them. So very cool ability and can be very useful. Selena, Dark Angel, and this is a very good sized flyer and it can protect itself. Again, you're paying life to return it to your hand, but that's quite alright if you're in a situation where it's going to be removed. So very, very good limited card. So here it is, the Sliver Queen. So here's the thing with Sliver Queen. It's a house. It's obviously a house. Even take away everything else. It's a 7/7 creature. It's going to do some damage. It's going to take over the board state. It's awesome. Let's say I don't have any other slivers. Well, I can even make some slivers, so that's kind of cool because now I can get some 1/1 tokens on the board as well. And if I have any other slivers that are there to give this and other slivers abilities, well, that's even more phenomenal. The only thing about this Sliver Queen is she's obviously very difficult to cast in Limited, being that she's 5 different colors. So here's the good news. They're going to hook you up in this set with color fixing. There's a cycle of all 10 combinations of dual lands, which we'll take a look at in a moment. And there's also a Lotus Pedal, which we'll take a look at in a moment, which are going to help you power out a card like this, but you have to be really prepared. So if you're in a draft and you happen to be able to draft around this a little bit and get a lot of color fixing, well, you might be able to use it. Sealed is going to be very, very difficult. Not to say it's impossible if you get just the perfect sealed pool, but don't try to force this guy in if you're in a situation where I might not be able to cast her. So just be real careful when it comes to selecting this card. But yeah, obviously it's a phenomenal card. Sotari Gorillas. And I like this. It's a very good limited shadow creature. It can do a lot of damage, and it can also kind of double as removal at the same time. So I do like this card quite a bit. This is also kind of interesting that it's red and white, and red really doesn't have any shadow creatures in the mono red. It has some anti-shadows, so kind of cool that this is Boros colors, but again, pretty good limited card. Spine Sliver, and just another great sliver. This is just going to help give your opponent fits when it's time to block, and just makes combat that much more difficult when you have slivers. And just like all the other slivers, you don't necessarily have to have 10, 12 slivers for this to be good. Even if you have 2 or 3, and it's just going to do some work for you. Dell, and I used to play with this guy a lot back in the original Tempest block and Paper Magic, and he's a good card. I mean, a 3/3 for 4 is fantastic, and just the hijinks he does with the power and toughness is just amazing. It just makes every combat just an impossible win situation for your opponent, and it just kind of slows down the game a little bit, but when blocks have to happen, or else sometimes it's just a matter of maybe you need to reduce toughness to get direct damage to be able to finish off a creature. It's just a really good card. I just really like this guy. His only downside is he's legendary, so you can't throw 3 or 4 copies out on the board and play with him, but he's a rare, so you're not going to see that many of him in limited. Very fine card. Victorial Silver, and this one's probably my least favorite of all the dual color slivers. I mean, it's still a sliver, so it's going to get all the abilities from all the other slivers you have, so that's good. His particular ability isn't too exciting, just to sacrifice slivers to get life. If you're up against a burn matchup, it's better. And maybe it's something you sideboard in, but if you got a bunch of other slivers, it's still going to be a fine guy for you. Wood Sage. I don't feel great about this guy. I mean, yeah, he's got a very niche role. You can certainly use him to dig for a key card, or, which is probably more likely, he can help drive the reanimation strategy and get some cards in your graveyard. But really, it's a very, very niche role, and in most cases, you're just not going to be playing him in limited. I mean, he is a rare because in constructed, he's a decent guy, and you can probably do some crazy things with him. But in limited, he's not as good. And we'll move on to the artifacts, and we'll go with Bottle Gnomes first. And he's an okay blocker for 3. He's a 1/3. You can stack him to gain life. He's not always going to make the cut in your deck. He's just not super exciting. But if you're against a burn matchup, he's a good guy to board in. Coat of Arms. This is a tricky one. It costs 5 mana, which is pretty pricey. Now, if you do have a lot of the same creature type in your deck, it's probably worth trying to make this work just because it's such a powerful effect. If you, say, are drafting an open pack 1 and you decide to go for it and go all in on Coat of Arms, well, you have a chance maybe you can build a deck and build around what you're being passed. Best case scenario, that's probably slivers, right? That would be amazing. But let's face it, in reality, it might not always be that easy to make this card work. It's not going to be for all decks, obviously. You'd have to have a good amount of tribal before you're going to try to squeeze this into your deck. Sealed pools, I think, would be very hard unless you got some sort of amazing sealed pool. I think it would be very hard to make this work. Coiled Tin Viper, and this is a fine guy. He costs 3 for a 2/1 first strike. Again, this limited environment, the creatures aren't as good or as big as the current day's environment, so a guy like this is just fine. He'll be a good creature for you. Curse Scroll. This is a very powerful card from limited as well as constructed. This is huge. Obviously, it's one of the key mythic rares in this set. And this is a great complement to burn strategies. When you're playing a burn deck and you have that situation where you just need to get a few more points of damage across, you can't seem to draw another burn spell, or your clock's running out because you got a bunch of creatures closing in on you and you need to take a couple of them out to get your last damage across. This is an awesome card for that. And the reason it's so good is because it's direct damage that you can use over and over and over and over again. And you can do it every turn, basically. Not as good in the earlier mid-game. When you have too many cards in your hand, it's going to be less reliable, obviously. And you might not always have the 3 mana in the early game to spend on this. However, very quickly, this card just becomes a house and just takes over the game. So, very, very awesome card. You might not put it in all your decks if you're playing a lot of aggro or something. It might not fit with what you're doing, but probably most decks you'll run this. A Messy Tome, and this is a good late mana sink. It can help you dig for answers. It can help drive reanimation. The only thing I will say, though, it is very pricey. It's going to be a dead card through probably most of the game. It's great late game, but you have to get to late game for it to be good. So not going to make the cut probably in a lot of your decks, but it's kind of there if you need it, especially if you're playing a longer, maybe control strategy. Erratic Portal, and I've always liked this card. It's a good way to protect your creatures, and it also kind of ties up your opponent's mana because they're in a situation where they have to keep at least 1 mana untapped so that you can't bounce something back to their hand. So it's kind of a nice, versatile card. Really like it a lot. It's not great in the early game, but it gets better very quickly. Grindstone. And Grindstone, In limited is a very interesting card. It can help drive reanimation strategy because you can mill yourself, so that's not always a bad thing. It can be decent in a very grindy control build, so maybe you have a control deck, a lot of counter spells, you're trying to drag out the game a little bit, then maybe milling could potentially be a win condition, but that's maybe a little far-fetched. It's a much better constructed card than it is a limited card, since it does kind of have a very niche role in limited. Now, obviously, anyone who's played Legacy is probably familiar with the Grindstone Painter Servant combo. In fact, Painter Servant was banned from EDH, from Commander, because this combo was so powerful, among some other combos that you can pull off with Painter Servant. But this is a very powerful card in Legacy, which is why it's a mythic rare. It's a little harder to make this work for you, unfortunately, in limited. Jinxed Idol. This card can be very annoying to your opponent, especially if you have a lot of removal to back it up and try to keep their creatures off the board. However, be real careful with this thing because it can backfire real quick. So basically, if you're ever in a situation where your opponent all of a sudden starts drawing more removal than you have, or they just simply start drawing more creatures than you have, this thing can get stuck on you. So it's kind of a silly card, kind of a fun casual card, probably more than anything. But if you're really trying to be seriously competitive, I'd probably steer clear of this one. Lotus Pedal, and this is an uncommon, maybe the best card in the set, or one of the best cards in the set, but this is the engine that's going to help you splash for some of those really great gold cards they have, especially the slivers. This is the one card that's probably going to make Sliver Queen castable and limited if you just get enough of these. This is going to be premium, first pick worthy. It's in a draft. You could get one of these if you open it. Maybe if you're lucky for a second pick. Maybe if you're really lucky, third pick. But don't expect these things to be floating around for long in any draft. They're just going to get snatched up because they're good in any deck. They ramp, they color fix, they help you splash. Just an amazing, amazing card. Metallic Sliver. And this is fine if you're running some slivers, and you'll have another creature that is going to be able to pick up their abilities. If you're not running slivers or many slivers, I'd probably skip this one. It doesn't really do much, doesn't contribute much. It's just a 1/1 for 1. Mindless Automation. This does help again with the reanimation strategies. It does kind of help you cycle cards in the late game, which is probably the best thing that it does, but it is, again, a very late game card, not very good in the early or the mid game. So it's not always going to make the build just for those reasons. Mox Diamond. This is one of the signature cards of the set. It's actually on the front of the booster pack for the photos on Magic Online. And it's a great card. I mean, it's great ramp. It's great color fixing. It does a lot of good things for you. The only thing you want to be careful of with this card is you have to be really thoughtful about your keeps and your mulligans when this is in your hand. The Mox Diamond, it's not quite as good, I don't think, as maybe a Chrome Mox or a Mox Opal. It's not as reliable. You just have to take into consideration you are pitching a land to get this thing into play. So that could make a difference in your decision to keep or mulligan your hands. So depending on your hand, having a Mox Diamond in one land, probably not good enough. Having a Mox Diamond in 2 lands might not be good enough. So you might need a Mox Diamond in 3 lands for that to really be a keep. You don't want to, I guess, get blinded by the word Mox and kind of think this is like free mana, because it kind of isn't free mana, unfortunately, but it's still a really good card. I don't want to downplay it too much. I'd still run it, especially if I'm trying to get some ramp. Just like any Mox, it's not going to feel great when you get it in the late game. You just are mana flooded already, but it's fine. It's a great card. Patchwork Gnomes, and this is 2/1 with regeneration, kind of, sort of. So that's not bad. It's better, of course, for reanimation or in a late game when you can just pitch like extra lands or something like that. So having said that, it is still pretty niche. It does still kind of have a small body. It's not very good in the earlier mid game, so most of the time probably won't make your cut. Phyrexian Hulk, and this guy's a limited bomb. He's a 5/4 for 6, so this is just a big creature, and he's colorless, so you can kind of put him in any deck. He doesn't have evasion, which is a little annoying because he could get chump blocked a lot, but he's still a big creature. You're still going to be able to play him in a lot of builds. One thing that I just kind of find as a side note interesting, we live in the day and age of things like Worm Coil Engine costing 6. So when you compare a card like this to Worm Coil Engine, but this is just how Magic was back in these days. Skyshaper, and this is okay. I mean, it can power through a big creature one time to get some damage, assuming they don't have a blocker in the air. But quite honestly, it's a little too niche to make the cut and situational to make the cut very often. You have to be really desperate to find a way to get your creatures across. Telethopter. It's a 3/1 with the possibility of flying, so that's going to make it a pretty good limited creature. You do need to be able to have another creature available to tap, though, to make sure that it can get its evasion. So a little situational. You are paying 4 for it, but 3/1 in the air is quite powerful. A lot of times you're just going to go ahead and take the risk if you don't have any better cards to put into your build. Thopter Squadron. This is another nice card. It's a 3/3 for 5 and it flies, so that's a great limited card. It has the extra flexibility. They're able to remove counters, to create tokens, remove tokens to put on counters, and those are nice to haves, especially if you're in a situation where you just need to get a couple extra points of damage across, and maybe they have one flying blocker, but that's all. So there is some flexibility to this card. The only thing I will warn you against, all those kind of moving counters and tokens can only be used as a sorcery, so be careful. It's not like you're going to be able to protect this thing against a spot removal at instant speed or anything like that, but it's still a really, really good flyer. Volrath's Laboratory. I'm not crazy about this one. Maybe in late game you could create some more slivers or get value out of a coat of arms if you're kind of going that direction. But quite honestly, it's very expensive for what it does. It taps, so even if you have the mana, you can only do this once a turn. It just doesn't feel real good to me, quite honestly. I just don't think you're going to get a lot of value out of this one. And that brings us to the lands. And our first one is Caldera Lake. And this is part of an enemy colored land cycle that's in this set. And they're kind of like the paintlands that we know and love. However, they do have an additional drawback where they come into play tapped. So they work a little bit slower. But in limited, they're still good. You're going to want to splash colors. You're going to want to try to cast some of the gold cards. You're going to want to maybe try to cast Sliver Queen. So you're going to use these. They're going to be decent for you. The only thing is just keep in mind the more of these that you have in your deck, it could slow you down a little bit. I'm not worried about the taking 1 damage to tap. I love the fact that you can also tap it for a colorless mana and you won't take damage. So it's a very good enemy cycle. Next is Cinder Marsh, and this is an example of the allied colored lands that we have. And these are similar but different to the Pain land cycle that the enemy colors have. This will also slow you down, but in a different way. So basically, I can either tap this for colorless mana and all is well and good, or I can tap it for one of the 2 colors and it doesn't untap during the next untap step. So that's kind of interesting. It slows you down where the pain lands are coming into play tapped, so they're only slowing you down once. This could potentially slow you down for more than 1 turn, which feels a little awkward. However, again, if you need color fixing, you're still going to use this. It's just fine and limited. It might not be as ideal as some of the great color fixing we have available to us today, but it's going to do its job. It's a fine card. City of Traders, and this is very good acceleration. It's another kind of classic card. You do have to be careful when you play this. You want to play it at the right time so you get the most value out of it. And sometimes just having it for 1 turn is good enough. You just power out something big early, and then next turn you just play another land and you continue on your normal mana curve, or kind of your normal mana curve, because this will set you back 1 land when you have to sacrifice it. However, it's still good. If you power up something big quick, it could still help you. So be careful with it, but it's a fine card. Maze of Shadows. This is just kind of a maze of ith for shadow creatures, which I thought was interesting. It can give you colorless mana, which the original Maze of Ith couldn't do, so that's good. However, when are you going to use this thing? Really, it's a sideboard card when you're up against Shadow, and it's going to be a great card for you when you're up against Shadow. In Mog Hollows, now this is the green and red version of the staystap land. And now we have our next Painland, and this is the black and green Pine Barrens. And now we have Rootwater Depths, which is our next staystap land. This is for the black and blue. And now we have Salt Flats, which is our next Painland, which is our white and black. So you have Scrabland, which is yet another one of the paintlands. This one's the red and white. And now Shroud Forest. This is yet another one of the paintlands. This one's the green and blue. And that brings us to Stalking Stones, and this is a mana source that gives you some versatility in the late game. It gives you colorless mana, so that's fantastic. And late in the game, it can become a 3/3 creature for you, which is just fine. Now it's harder to remove this creature, which is also another nice bonus. So if someone plays a board sweeper, or if they have creature removal, they have to wait for you to activate it before they can use that removal. So those are all benefits. The only thing I will say, if you're playing more than 2 colors, you're trying to splash colors or get different colors, you don't want to probably consider this guy an actual land. You can maybe run him in addition to your lands if you really feel you need him, but he isn't going to give you that color fixing, so just something you want to be careful of. And that brings us to our next kind of stagger land, and that's Thyroxine Lowlands. This will give us the white or blue. Vek Township is our green and white, tap every other turn land. This will bring us to Erratic Stronghold. This is a really fine land. It's actually at the mythic rare level. And first off, it is legendary, so you can only have 1 copy at a time. But you can get your colorless mana out of it, which is awesome. And then on top of that, if you pay a black and a colorless, you can take a card from your graveyard and put it on top of your library. One of the things you may have noticed is there's a lot of cards that force you to discard cards, or even a lot of mill type cards in here. So all those cards that end up in your graveyard that maybe you weren't able to reanimate, or maybe they just ended up in your graveyard, now you have a chance to recur some of those creatures. So it's a good card. If you know you're going to be playing a lot of those discard type abilities, it doesn't hurt to put this in there. Again, if you're playing more than 2 colors, be careful because it doesn't give you colored mana, but maybe you just treat this as a spell more so than a land. And Wasteland, and this is at the rare level. This is a card that probably could have been at the mythic level. It's just that good. However, my assumption is through play testing, they probably felt that it was a valuable card in the limited environment to bring to the rare level. So it is very, very good against non-basic lands. It's good to run these for disruption. If I end up with a Wasteland, yeah, I'm going to probably play it in limited just because I know in most cases I'm going to be going up against a lot of those dual lands that we just looked at. Now, again, much like the other lands, make sure your mana base can support a colorless mana land. If it can't, maybe just treat it as a spell as opposed to a land. So just be careful there. But this is really excellent. In some cases, maybe it starts in the sideboard. However, it's going to do you well, I think, in a lot of matchups. So that is actually the last card of our set review. The one thing I do want to show you, though, before we wrap up is I do have the basic lands, and they just have some really nice art, so I just wanted to showcase those very quickly. There's the plains, the islands, the swamps, the mountains, and finally the forests. So, having said that, that is the entire set for Tempest Remastered. Through these 6 parts, we went through every single card. We looked at them from a limited point of view in most cases. Hopefully now you'll feel ready to play some limited Tempest Remasters on Magic the Gathering Online. So let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are. Now that you've seen the whole set, do you feel like this is a good set? Do you think this will be a fun product on Magic Online? Let me know. Maybe do you not even play Magic Online? Or are you interested in getting into Magic Online? Just like to kind of get the temperature gauge of how you all feel about MTGO. I know I play it at least a little bit, and it can be hard transitioning from Paper Magic to Magic Online, and it can be also hard probably going back to Paper Magic, especially when you put all your resources in either the online or the paper. I think that's very difficult. I wish there was an easier way to be able to maybe trade your cards back and forth. I have heard that Puka Trade is working on a system to do that, which might be really cool. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that as that moves forward. But anyway, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. We have one more video that we'll do for tomorrow, which is another video that's going to be part of Tempest Remastered Week. And then we'll get back to all our regular stuff. Got a lot of pack openings. I have a Legacy Cube that I've already done that I haven't posted yet. So a lot of good stuff coming up next week. Thanks as always. Have a great day.